Warning: viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following program contains graphic descriptions of real-life crimes that have shocked and haunted communities worldwide. Trigger warnings include violence, abuse, and explicit details that some may find disturbing. This episode may also contain unsettling sound effects, original audio recordings, and other chilling materials that bring you closer to these dark events. These stories are shared with respect for the victims, but the content may linger with you long after. Listen carefully and proceed with caution. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, I'm calling from the Oxford Apartments, apartment 213. I need to report something really strange. What's going on? I just saw a young boy being led into his apartment by a man. And the boy doesn't look right. He's bleeding, and he doesn't seem like he knows what's happening. Please, you have to send someone. Can you describe the man for me? Yes, it's that man, Dahmer. I've seen him around the building before. He's always been kind of odd, but this is something else. He's got a look on his face like he's hiding something. We'll send an officer to check it out. Just stay calm and don't get involved. No, you don't understand. You have to see this boy. He's hurt, and he doesn't want to go inside. Please, this isn't right. Ma'am, we'll send someone as soon as possible. Just stay where you are. But you don't understand. He needs help now. Please, you have to hurry. In the dimly lit hallway of a quiet apartment complex, a chilling scene unfolded. A young boy, bruised and barely able to walk, staggered between the shadows. His face was smeared with blood, his movements sluggish like a person caught between reality and nightmare. A man, cold and methodical, gripped the boy's arm with unsettling strength, guiding him toward the door of his apartment. The boy's muffled cries echoed in the hallway, but the man didn't seem to hear, or perhaps he didn't care. This wasn't a moment of panic or desperation. It was calculated like a predator leading its prey to a trap. And as the boy was dragged further into the apartment, the building's wall seemed to get close in on him. No one knew it yet, but in that very moment, the boy's fate was sealed, and the horror would soon be unveiled. This is the Crime Mama Collective. As the police car pulled away, the building returned to its eerie quiet. But inside apartment 213, the terror was only beginning. Conrad Synthosophones, still reeling from the trauma, was led back into the very apartment he had tried to escape. What had seemed like an opportunity to flee, to call out for help, was instead a fleeting moment of hope now shattered. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing Conrad's fate. He was unaware of the true horror that lay waiting for him inside. Dahmer, cold and composed, closed the distance between them, a predator ready to finish what he had started. But for the boy, the nightmare was far from over. Meanwhile, outside in the darkened hallways of the building, the shadows grew longer, and so did the silence. No one knew that just beyond the walls, another life was slipping away, and another unimaginable horror was about to unfold. This is Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21st of 1960 to Lionel Dahmer and Joyce Dahmer, also known as Joyce Flint, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There have been many statements made by family members and even Jeffrey's parents themselves that he didn't have the best upbringing. And we're going to dive into that a little bit here so we can have an understanding of his childhood and seeing if his background actually had an interference to his killing spree. So having a dad who was always absent due to work studies and a mom who had several medical problems who could barely handle her own life made it very hard for him to have parental supervision. But Dahmer's fascination had to come from somewhere, right? I mean, you just aren't born with this randomly one day. It had to come from somewhere. And a lot of people know and others may not know, but his dad actually had his own desires and weird interests himself when he was a very young lad himself. A little bit similar to Dahmer, just used for more educational purposes. And he had a true passion for learning how to preserve bones, decompose, and really learn how things are made. Eventually, later on until his childhood, Lionel took on a very long study time to get his doctorate in I can't even pronounce this word. and analytical chemistry, which resulted in the disattachment from Jeffrey for quite some time. Because he was so focused on his schooling than to really pay close attention to Jeffrey's needs, he kind of just swept away and just didn't pay attention to him. So while he wasn't present in a lot of his time, his dad would never really think that his son having an interest of this would turn into something so evil. So how could this pull into Jeffrey's murder habits that he had? Well, we're about to find out. So Jeffrey became so attached and intrigued to his dad's science that when he was watching his dad do what he did, either pulling bones out from underneath the house, dissecting animals, just really learning anything there is about animals, Jeffrey was there watching him, asking questions. He learned how to make chemicals from his dad to preserve bones, and even would go out and pick up roadkill and dissect them at his home to see exactly how the animals were put together. His mother, Joyce, had her own fair share of problems as well, having been diagnosed with depression, anxiety disorders, and borderline personality disorder. She was very dependent on prescription drugs and was oftentimes called a hypochondriac by her family because she was constantly needing attention. Being on medications and having medical problems she had, which caused her to have headaches and to be very tired most days, often shutting herself out, not really having anything to do with Jeffrey. Her illness did get a little bit worse during her second pregnancy with Jeffrey's younger brother, David, and then her pill addiction got a little bit heavier too during that time period. So basically, it was just a whole bunch of medical issues that she had upon health problems with mental problems. She just was not the mom that Jeff needed her to be. So between having an absent dad who taught him about death, literally how to dissect, dismember, and properly dispose, and a mom who had mental disorders and was in such a cloud in her own world, not to mention that his parents also had so much tension at this time in their marriage, constantly fighting and arguing that there was never true happiness. That is a huge problem for an adolescent growing up. Jeffrey didn't have the supervision that he needed. If there were more awareness and concerns for his safety, thinking about their child instead of their own problems and putting their kid first, maybe things could have been different. What do you think about that? But oftentimes, some kids don't get the chance and get silenced or worse. Throughout the years as Jeffrey was growing up, he was always described as an odd kid. He never had many friends and would often be described as the outcast. As he reached his teenage years in high school, this is where things really started taking a turn and gets disturbing. Dahmer's fascination with death and dissection was a prominent topic in his life during high school. He often talked about dead animals and his hobby of collecting and dissecting them. He would go into great detail about how he would find roadkill and take the animals home to cut into and observe. This turned people away, and I mean clearly for a reason. We all had that one kid in high school that was always weird, seemed super shy and just stuck to themselves. That was Dahmer, only he had something really wrong with him, an inner monster. And alcohol was a huge part in his behavior. He started drinking at just age 14. First, it started off with beer, then packs, then case after case, getting drunk all the time. Hard liquor became an equal part, and he would often bring bottles filled with alcohol to school. And when asked by his peers, why is he drinking at school during the day, Dahmer responded, "It's my medicine." This was going on day in and day out, and it really started taking over his life. And also during his high school time, he struggled deeply with his own sexual identity. He tried to be interested in women by reading porn magazines like your typical boy would do, but he was not getting the sexual harassment or pleasure that he needed. His sexual frustration started to grow intense, and he would often fantasize about stalking someone, taking them and making them unconscious so he can rape them and take full control of their body. He had even tried to make this fantasy a reality one day when he was just 16 years old and had his eyes on a jogger for a while. And one day when Dahmer was ready to make his first attack, the jogger didn't show up that day, but that didn't stop him. After Jeffrey graduated from Revere High School in 1978, he attended Ohio State University for a short period of time, but his drinking began to take over and he dropped out. He moved back home with his parents in Bath, Ohio. During this time of his stay, their marriage was falling apart, and he really did not have any support at all. He enlisted into the Army in 1980 to escape the turmoil at home and to grow some sense into his life. But his alcoholism really started taking over in this, and he was discharged from the military and sent back home. After his dishonorable discharge, Dahmer went to live with his father. He would often wander the streets alone a lot at night and would work dead-end jobs back-to-back, never really able to hold one due to his drinking, which landed his first arrest in 1982 for public intoxication. His behavior really started taking a turn after his arrest, and he needed stability and help. So he was sent to go and live with his grandma, Catherine Dahmer, who his dad was hoping would be able to give him a more nurturing environment. While he was living with his grandma, she provided him with everything he needed. Money, food, anything he needed, he got. He seemed like the perfect grandson to everyone who met him, always smiled and had a kind heart. But his heart, his dark desires and strong sexual fantasies were just growing stronger and stronger every day. In 1988, Jeffrey wanted to make his fantasy happen where he would completely own someone, and he committed his first murder. He had met a 19-year-old hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, who was on his way to a concert before he got picked up, luring Stephen back to his grandma's house with a promise for drinks. And after several long hours of drinking and talking, Hicks wanted to leave and tried, but Jeffrey didn't want him to go. Jeffrey grabbed a 10-pound dumbbell and hit him 2 times in the head. Once he was unconscious, Dahmer began to strangle him to death, then took off his clothes, rubbed his hands on his chest and torso, then stood up and masturbated over his dead body with a sick pleasure. He dissected Hicks' body in the basement of his grandmother's house the next day, used acid to dissolve the flesh, and crushed his bones up enough to be scattered outside around the family home. And to top it off, he wanted a trophy. He kept Stephen's skull and painted it for his collection. After this completed and first brutal murder, Dahmer took a break from committing more and really started to heavily drink. His drinking got so bad and out of hand that his grandma had a talk with his dad, and they spoke to Jeffrey, both saying he needed to move out and get a place of his own. He moved out of his grandma's house in 1989 and found the Oxford Apartments located in Milwaukee, where he rented out room 213. And the rest is history. Just kidding. We're going to take a small break really quick, but thanks for sticking with us so far. Because we dive back into this chilling story, we're going to take a quick moment to talk about something exciting here at the Mama Crime Collective. We know crime stories can get pretty heavy, so we try to balance things out with a little community connection. If you're enjoying our content and want to keep exploring the darker side of history with us, don't forget to follow us on TikTok. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where we share bonus clips, behind the scenes moments, and some fun challenges. And for the true crime buffs out there, we're working on a brand new segment where we answer your questions or dive into the cases you want to hear about. So shoot us a message on Facebook or drop a comment below. You never know, your suggestion might actually make it to one of our episodes. Alright, so now that we've caught up our breath, let's get back into it, because this next part, it's about to get even more unsettling. As Dahmer rented out his small Milwaukee apartment, it was the perfect setup for him. It wasn't in the best area of town, but it was the only one he could afford, and he was proud of that. He made it a forever home. literally. In 1989, he craved that desire for possession and control again, and went downtown to Club 219, a gay bar in Milwaukee, and met Stephen Tomoy. He offered to take Stephen to the Ambassador Hotel for drinks. Now, this is where things are weird, because in interviews, Dahmer claims he has no recollection of ever killing Tomoy, but somehow woke up to him naked and dead next to him. But because he had such a strange fascination, he took Tomoy's body back to his grandma's house and dismembered it bit by bit and bagged it up in black trash bags. Which, mind you, the trash men did take away with them, never knowing there was a dead body in those bags. He did keep Tomoy's skull, but it did dispose of it after a while. And here is a little brief audio clip of that recording talking about Dahmer and Stephen.
Going to the bookstores. Eventually that led to frequenting the gay bars. And then one time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. Had no intention of hurting him. When I woke up in the morning, he had a broken rib here. Was heavily bruised. Apparently I had beaten him to death with my fists.
And you have no memory?
I have no memory of it. But
the saying goes, when a dog first gets that taste of blood, they want more. Well, this is the case for Jeffrey. His obsession grew and grew. In 1988, Dahmer took the lives of James Doxtider, promising $50 to pose for photos. Richard Guerrero, the same promising of money, and Anthony Sears. All three of these men had no clue that this smiling, good-looking man was about to be the last look they will ever see. Because of his obsession and strong desire to take control, he drugged all three men, strangled and raped their dead bodies. Just like Stephen Tomoy's disposal, Dahmer dismembered James and Richard's bodies, put them in trash bags that the garbage men took to the dump yet again. Out of the 1988 killings, Anthony Sears was the only one who Jeffrey actually kept his penis in his skull. From 1990 to 1991, Dahmer met Eddie Smith, Ernest Miller, David C. Thomas, Oliver Lacey, Joseph Bradoft, Matt Turner, Tony Hughes, and Konrad Synthosophone, who was the brother of Somsak, who was one of Dahmer's victims, but he was able to escape. Dahmer had been charged earlier in 1991 of molesting Konrad's younger brother, Somsak, but being left out on bail, he was able to go back to his own ways and murder 17 people. So getting into all of this, Dahmer's victims faced him after being invited to drinks to his apartment just to hang out and talk. They got drugged and tricked into a cloudy wonder, to having your neck strangled while you're unconscious, then to being completely lifeless, dead, stripped, molested, raped, posing each of his victims in ways bodies should not bend or seen that he found sexually arousing. He would take Polaroids and masturbate to them, dismembering them one by one and actually keeping body parts in his apartment this time: skulls, genitalia, bones. Imagine the smell and the noises coming from the neighbors' houses. The thing that is truly sad and beyond disturbing about this whole case is the neighbors complained to the landlord about the smell. But because Dahmer was a charmer, he got away with murder for years and years, always saying his freezer went out or it was just bad meat that he forgot to throw away. Glenda Cleveland, in particular, was one neighbor who was a huge part in Dahmer's case, as she had made several attempts to call law enforcement, complaining about noises, screaming, and fighting, all coming from Dahmer's apartment late at night. And when dispatch said they would send someone, no one ever came to check. All they had to do was sit there in their building listening to these horrible and gruesome sounds coming from his apartment. It just gives me chills thinking about. It literally sends chills down my spine. In that audio recording you heard earlier today in the beginning of the podcast, that was a reenactment I did of one of Glenda's calls about Konrad. The police officers came to the house, saw this boy, but because he looked a little bit older and Dahmer somehow managed to convince them that this was his boyfriend, and they let him go back with Dahmer where he met his fate. His body, already beaten and bloody, was a failed attempt at law enforcement to go in and check. And like I said, Dahmer managed to dismember and murder 17 young men and boys. His last victim, Joseph Bradhoft, was just days before his arrest. So we want to know, how did Dahmer get caught? Anybody who knows the story knows that this dude is a freaking bastard. Genius IQ of 145, which is insane to even think that he did this. All from an interest in science and just really, really, really weird shit. And I can't comprehend it, but we're going to get into it a little bit. So here we go. On July 22nd of 1991, Dahmer met Tracy in a nearby bar, lured back to his home with his same old patterns for an attack. Dahmer drugged and handcuffed him. He did struggle, but he managed to escape and run out of the apartment, screaming and yelling at the top of his lungs. "He's trying to kill me! He's trying to kill me!" Hearing these screams and cries for help alerted neighbors, and Tracy ran into officers on the way out of Dahmer's apartment, telling them what he witnessed and what was about to happen. So here we have Tracy, who was just about to be murdered, manages to escape out of the fight for his life, flags down police. You're wondering what happens next, right? Me too. Tracy is still in distress from what he went through. Dahmer answered the door and two officers asked him questions. Dahmer's presence is very calm-like. He denied any wrongdoing that he was accused of and tried to explain to the cops that Tracy was simply just a lover who had been arguing with him, claiming he was drunk and he had been in a domestic dispute. Officers didn't really think there was anything going on, but using caution, they stepped inside apartment 213. Upon walking through the apartment, officers noticed several Polaroids of dismembered bodies in gruesome positions. They thought these pictures were some kind of sick, sinister joke, but when they turned a corner in the apartment and saw human remains, that is when the gut-wrenching blow to their stomach hit and realized they had some serious shit going on here. During some searching of the apartment, they got to Dahmer's bedroom, where they find more Polaroid images of his victims' lifeless bodies, cut open, dismembered, and positioned, and that is when they realized Tracy Edwards was telling the truth. Officer Wolf Mueller stated after finding the photographs that they had a serial killer on their hands. After finding that little bit of evidence, Dahmer was placed under arrest, and the apartment building was marked as a crime scene and had to evacuate every person living there. Upon their full investigation, they found 5 severed male heads, 7 skulls, including some that were painted or bleached, a tray of blood drippings in the refrigerator, 2 human hearts, a part of an arm, torso, human organs, and flesh frozen in ice in the bottom of his freezer, 2 skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 severed penises, a mummified scalp, as well as 3 more torsos were found dissolving in acid in a 57-gallon drum located in the kitchen. 74 Polaroids in total were found in each dismemberment of each victim. Dahmer was taken down to the police station and questioned during his interrogation, where he first tried to deny any of the charges, but then ended up confessing to the murders. He then would go into great detail to officers about his murder spree over the last 13 years of killing young men and boys, and how he would stalk these men at downtown gay bars, charm them acting like he was their friend, offer a beer, and put a drug mix in them so he would pass out unconscious. He would then talk about taking complete control and strangling them where they are completely lifeless, then allowing himself to dominate these men's bodies, playing with himself as he touches every inch of their bodies down to the full-on necrophilia. Upon further questioning and confessing, Dahmer told officers he tried to experiment on the bodies and try to turn them into zombies by drilling holes into their heads and filling them with acid to turn them into his mind-controlling sex slaves. He wanted to control them that much. He also confessed to eating some of his victims' flesh and occasionally would make sandwiches for his neighbors, claiming the meat was pulled pork. On August 6 of 1991, Dahmer was officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Those charges would grow in relation to the victims. A total of 17 counts of first-degree murder. He was also charged with abuse of a corpse, torture charges, kidnapping charges, and sexual assault. His defense team did try to get Dahmer to say that he was not mentally stable at the time of his trial to see if that can get him sentences, as they did for Ed Gein back when he did his murder spree. But Dahmer made a statement that he was in full control, knew exactly what he was doing, and that he would declare himself as not insane. He pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. During his time of confinement, he was also ordered to solitary confinement due to the nature of his crimes and also the threat and danger to other inmates. He was placed at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. His time in prison was rather odd. He would still be at the same odd person, but would occasionally try to engage with other inmates, but not in the same way you think a normal person would. He would almost brag about his crimes, have almost no remorse for what he did, and use his dark humor to make a joke out of it. He even stated he wanted inmates to call him the Beast because of his gruesome acts. Being in prison, you go through your typical day in and day out routine: eat, shower, sleep, and whatever else they had planned. Well, one day, being on unassigned work day, Dahmer was paired to work with two other men. One named Jesse Anderson, another convicted murderer, and Christopher Scarver. The men were unsupervised in the gymnasium in the prison, and they had a confrontation. Scarver had concealed a metal bar that he used to fatally beat and kill Dahmer and Anderson. Now, isn't that a wild ride? It's almost unbelievable how much Jeffrey Dahmer managed to get away with. From his early crimes to his early life in prison, it really makes you wonder and think, how did he get away with this for so long? The questions just keep piling up. But that's it for today. As always, stay curious, stay vigilant, and until next time, stay blessed, stressed, and totally crime obsessed. Oh yeah, and always keep questioning the world around you, because you never know who may be lurking right behind you. Boo.